All right, live once again for the Dynasty Saturday Night Five. I am Brian, and with me tonight is a guest co-host. He is not Josh, but the name does begin with a J. Also from the Going for Two family, and that's Jordan. Jordan, how you doing?
Living the dream, Brian. Happy to be here. Excited to talk a little Dynasty with you. I've been covering IDPs with Jerry and the Cover Zero crew the last few weeks, so I'm excited to switch it up here in season.
Right on. This is a dynasty show. Folks may not have seen you yet and are going for two family, or certainly not on this show. What do you like about dynasty? How long have you been into it?
Yeah, so my first Dynasty League was probably about 5 or 6 years ago, primarily in keeper and redrafts for the first, I'd say, 10 or so years of me playing fantasy. A lot of the keeper leagues that I was in slowly evolved into Dynasty formats. I love a challenge. That's why I'm in 30 leagues across, vampires and guillotines and best ball and you name it. So I'm very competitive. I'm very strategic. I like to spread my wings as far as possible and
Mm.
test out my analytical skills in terms of strategy. So I love Dynasty because I'm an entrepreneur at heart. I owned and operated businesses most of my life, and it feels like that sometimes when you're running a Dynasty league. Growing up playing franchise mode in Madden feels a little more
Mm-hmm.
real in Dynasty League. So
Mm-hmm.
it's been one of my favorites personally. As much
Yeah.
as I love a good old draft and getting together with the boys and doing a redraft, I think Dynasty tests your skills in a little different of a way. And I think my strategy has evolved over the years to where I
Mm.
was one of those suckers in the beginning where I was strictly looking at the youngest players. I'm like, I'm gonna build 10-year dynasties and I'm just gonna
Yeah.
wipe
Yeah.
the floor with everybody for the next 10 years. So even the evolution of my strategy has been really interesting. But yeah, I'm excited to be here. I'm excited to talk a little dynasty. Ready to go.
Right on. Well, folks, if you're watching on Twitter, we love you. Good move. But if you want to comment in the chat, head on over to YouTube, or you might also be in some of the Facebook streams now watching, and I think those social comments come to us. So make sure you're on a place where you can interact in the chat. So tonight's episode is going to be early surprises, small sample size theater, because it's only been 2 weeks, but we're going to kind of assess where we're at now and what those surprises mean for Dynasty, what their impact is on the Dynasty landscape. But first, the landscape that we're going to talk about is betting. So, No House Advantage is changing the game by offering the most dynamic fantasy sports platform available today. Play pick'em style contests versus other people for the shot at winning 150,000 or more. Download the app, use our promo code GF2, that's easy to remember, and get a deposit match of up to $25. Choose a contest, select your player props, earn points for the correct picks, and climb the leaderboard for your shot at big money every day. You can also test your skills versus the house and 20x your entry if you hit all your picks. Bet on up to five-player prop over-unders or individual player matchups across every major sports league, including NFL, NBA, MLB, PGA, MMA, and NASCAR. Again, the promo code is GF2. Use it at nohouseadvantage.com or download the app on the App Store to get a first deposit match of up to $25. Make sure to check out No House Advantage today and experience daily fantasy sports redefined, because it's not just how you play, but also where you play. And where do we play? Dynasty leagues. So, 2 weeks into the NFL season, and things are looking interesting. Right? If it wouldn't be an NFL season if there weren't surprises to talk about. So we each are going to have 5 surprises, and then talk about their dynasty impact. So you're the guest. Why don't you go first?
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm gonna kick it off with the Jaguars, then a topic that everybody loves to talk about. Um, Internally, I'm always rooting for the Jaguars because I think when I've seen a franchise in disarray that long, I'm like, oh, you guys can do it. But I want to talk a little bit about the backfield there and Christian Kirk to start with. I know I listened to the episode that you guys had last week. You did talk about Travis Etienne a little bit, but I was a big Travis Etienne fan when he was coming out of Clemson. I think the most shocking piece to me of that backfield is just how much they're using James Robinson off of that injury. I think I really anticipated them easing him back into it. Maybe you saw something where it was, maybe 65-35 in ETN's favor as they kind of eased in, or maybe a 50-50 because they're both being eased in. But so far, it is really tilted in favor of James Robinson, 65.5% opportunity share for him. I'm big into following some of those Twitter doctors, and I follow it pretty closely because a lot of those can give you trends in terms of when you can expect peak production coming off an injury. So, a lot of the doctors that I follow are like, give James Robinson anywhere between 4 to 8 weeks. That's when you should see him back at 100% production or pretty close to it. So, to see him week one come in, get a high amount of usage, be very effective with the touches that he's getting has been really, really surprising to me. And, when you really start to dive into it a little more, I'm a big Miles Sanders fan. I have been for a while. And as a Miles Sanders truther for years, we complained about his usage. And I think we might have forgotten who the offensive mind behind that scheme was. It was Doug Peterson. I'm, not ready to say that's going to happen to Travis Etienne after 2 games under Doug Peterson, but I think it's something we at least have to be aware of and really pay attention to that usage because
Mhm.
I think people wanted ETN to come in, really take control of that backfield. I'm not a big camp hype guy personally, but he got all of the hype in the world. So to see that usage to me is really surprising. And it's not just because I'm an ETN fan. It's just, it has really been skewed towards
Yeah.
James Robinson. And then
Mm.
the second piece of that, originally I was going to do a separate one about Christian Kirk, but I'm like, I'm not going to spend two of my numbers here on the Jaguars. So let's just combine it all
Yeah.
together. So Christian Kirk to me was interesting. I mean, that contract was shocking to a lot of people, but I did not think that he was going to be an alpha number one kind of receiver. Do I think that he is? I think the verdict is still out after 2 games. But him and Trevor Lawrence have definitely built a strong connection after 2 games. And I think that he's only 25 years old. He's a
Mhm.
guy that I think I'm going to have to adjust to my dynasty rankings. I had him really slid down there. I was not all in. Said, I got to see it first. I thought he was a perfect complement to a guy like Hopkins in Arizona. But so far, he's looked like he has a little bit of upside to be a number one kind of guy. Now, I still think it's probably a position they addressed in the draft in the near future to find that true alpha number one. But him and Trevor Lawrence have a nice chemistry. He's been getting red zone targets, third in the league in red zone targets right now, 19th in target share. So I'm definitely a little surprised by their early success and a guy that's shooting up my rankings. And for ETN, as an ETN lover, a guy that I'm going to have to slide down a little bit because James Robinson is still young. He's been effective, and I think that long term we're looking at a split here.
Mm. Yeah, I mean, as you saw on last week's episode, I was probably lower on Etienne than consensus already. So this isn't like a huge surprise for me, but I am definitely surprised at the level to which Robinson's been used this early,
Yep.
right? You mentioned the Doug Peterson phenomenon, and I mentioned that to my co-host on my other podcast, Dynasty Fever. He's a big Eagles fan, and he
Mhm.
said, "Well, Doug Peterson had to use multiple backs. Like, who were his running backs then, right? He only got Sanders towards the end of his tenure, so." So I was also like, okay, let's see, right? It's only been 2 weeks, but yeah, I think the community was a little off on Etienne as far as like the role that he'll have. We'll see, right? So Etienne probably slips a few spots in your rankings. Maybe Robinson up a bit. You think?
Yep. Yeah, that's where I would have it. I mean, I think a lot of people had James Robinson around RB, the late 30s is what I was seeing a lot for him in Dynasty. But, I think you really got to think, I'm not going to say RB2 territory, but definitely at least the early 30s.
Yeah, I think I had him in about the early 30s, and I think I got him up around 25 or 26 now.
Yep. Right on the border. Yep.
Mm-hmm. As far as Kirk goes, I don't think he's a one, but I think he's their one.
Yeah.
And the volume will probably be there, considering they're going to be playing catch up a lot.
Yep.
So he's another guy. I think I had him around 38 or 39, and now I've got him up maybe around, I don't know. I got to look, but just a few spots
Just a few.
higher.
Yep.
Yeah. Certainly someone that, is young enough where if you're in a rebuild, it's not like a sell high sort of thing,
Yep.
like, oh, let me capitalize off of this. So yeah, interesting piece to have. Yeah. So I'm going to start off with running backs. And I may take a little while to explain this, but so bear with me, right? I think when I look at ranking dynasty running backs, it's like 2-year window, right? Like, whereas I might say a 3-year window with wide receivers or something like that, right? And the position seems to be in flux more so than other positions too. But my big surprise is just how in flux it is this early. So I've had Swift as RB2 in Dynasty for a long time. It looked like people were getting kind of down on him, but now I think they're sort of coming around. I'll accept an argument for CMC as RB2. After that, though, you can make a case for a lot of people in a lot of places, and things I think are shifting. I've got Javonte up now at 3 because the timeshare is not 50-50. It's leaning in his favor. Najee barely hanging on as an RB5, as the RB5 for me. Barkley's up a bit for me. How many RBs are you really confident in for a window of the next 2 years, right? Mitch from Dynasty Theory was doing an episode on the top 5 Dynasty RBs, and he was like, well, things are so topsy-turvy, Bijan Robinson is the RB5 now, right? I joke with him that's cheating, but when you think about it, there's a lot that could happen, right? Eckler and Kamara are sort of aging out of being, top running backs. Chubb is very good, but limited PPR, upside there with the receiving, and himself is turning 27 in December. Dobbins isn't playing yet, and who knows, what he's going to look like coming back. Akers, like Robinson, coming back from an Achilles, but has been much more disappointing. Jacobs gets 88% of the RB rushes for Las Vegas this year, but it's not amounting to much. And, Bolden is certainly getting the receiving work. I just look at this and I think very soon my rankings could look very different, let alone at the end of the season, right? And then also on top of that, when we add the 23 rookie class incoming, right? So, I put in the show sheet sort of my range of I think I have a solid top 7 that are pretty much fixed for me. And then I put on the show sheet there, 8 through 22, right? And I'm just going to pick and look at a couple of them. Dalvin Cook at 9, you're going to talk about him later as far as the opportunities that he's getting. And he also, is dinged up a lot. And I think already 26 pushing 27. And then there's sort of this swath of running backs I have, like Akers, Jacobs, Derrick Henry, who you're going to talk about later, Elijah Mitchell, AJ Dillon, Etienne, CEH, Monty, Kenneth Walker III, right? I kind of don't know what to do. They're kind of all smushed together as meh, they're not RB1s, right? But they're probably better than that next group of guys I have, that start with the J-Rob range. And I could see this going a million ways by the end of the season. And then I forgot to finish the list of 23 rookies that I was working on. But already, just off the top of my head, Bijan, Gibbs, Zach Evans, Tucker,
Mhm.
right? Like, they're gonna be mixing in here too. I think
Yeah.
dynasty running back is gonna look very different very soon.
Yeah, no, and it's been a hard shift in mindset for me personally. I mean, back 10 years ago when you were really looking at team construction and what was important, I think there was a heavy premium on running back. I know for me personally, with a shifting landscape like this, I think in terms of how I look at roster construction changes quite a bit. And I don't know if you'd agree with that sentiment, but over the last few years, I think running backs used to win championships in fantasy, but I don't think you can rely on them enough anymore to say that. If I have an early rookie pick, I'd rather invest it in an upside receiver. Personally, just from a longevity standpoint, from a, I don't know if I can trust this guy, a year from now standpoint. So I think that's the interesting piece to me is I think it really impacts roster construction, how you think about positions, what you're investing in for me personally.
Hmm. Yeah, for sure. And I think what an interesting development in some leagues that I'm in as well is the starting lineup has changed, where
Hmm.
we're doing one of each, and then the rest are flex and super flex,
Yeah.
right? So if you have one of those like one RB leagues, that also is a heavy influence on how you're looking at the position when drafting and trading, right? And so overall, yeah, I think the position takes a ding. But does that then mean that like the special ones, like JT or Bijan, right, are that much more valuable?
Yeah, I mean, just in terms of, when people look at even the tight end position over the last few years, that's why people are going bonkers over Kyle Pitts right now, because they see a guy who, if you're every week when you're facing an opponent, you're like, I have a positional advantage,
Hmm.
and that's the goal. And I think running back's going to turn into that a little bit, but I think picking and choosing those guys is going to become a lot more risky.
Mm, for sure. Absolutely. Yeah. I don't know that. I was talking about this a few episodes ago on my other podcast about, the NFL is treating the position differently. It's
Mhm.
drafting the position differently. Um, and has fantasy caught all the way up to that? I don't know. Yeah.
We're getting there, one step at a time.
All right. What's
All
your
right.
next big surprise?
Number two, and I kind of had a mix to I tend to be a very I can look at a situation and say, that's not surprising. So a few of these for me are more maybe just surprising to the community and not as much me personally. I was a huge Jalen Waddle guy when he was coming out.
Me
We
too.
did live draft coverage, and I said when he got drafted, I said he's the next Tyreek Hill. And Jerry, my co-host on the Cover Zero podcast, was like, "You're insane." I'm like, "Nah, I truly believe this. Watch the tape." And so far so good for him. But when they brought Tyreek Hill in, I'll be honest, I was a little nervous about it. You have a new head coach in, you don't know what that offense is going to look like. I feel like everywhere I go, I need to wear a shirt that says I believe in Tua because I am a Tua believer, and I think that really divides people in the fantasy community. I've gotten into my
Yeah.
fair share of Tua arguments over the last year and a half now, but you
Yeah,
know,
and you put here in the show sheet that two is not the surprise, right? For
no.
me and for me and you, he's not. Like, but yeah. Yeah.
He's like, yeah, I believe in two. Yeah, of course he's, leading the league in passing. I knew that was going to happen. But yeah, I think it's more Jalen Waddle's target share. I mean, it is only 2 games. The big game last week skews that a little bit. Well, it skews the targets, but the overall share of the targets, it doesn't skew in terms of percentages. So I think that's the surprising piece to me. He's only one target overall behind Tyreek Hill. You never know what that dynamic is going to look like. So I think the surprising piece for me is the target share for Jalen Waddle. I love being a Rams fan. I can always appreciate when a team brings in a young offensive mind, but we've seen it go one of two ways, and that's one of the reasons I was skeptical. You have
Mhm.
Sean McVay's, and then you have Adam Gase's. So I needed to. Mike McDaniel so far has looked the part team really seems to buy into his system, the culture that he's building. So, as a guy with a lot of Waddle shares in Dynasty, because I very rarely, if I'm skeptical, I'm going to sell. I see a lot of people push the panic button. I'm more of a hold guy myself, especially if I believe in the talent, because talent finds its way onto the field. I will always say that 100% of the time. But yeah, I've been very pleasantly surprised, I guess, with Jalen Waddle's initial target share.
So for someone like you and I, right, who was a believer, had a lot of shares going into this, probably rank him higher than
Hmm.
the community, right? Um, since you have so much in your portfolio, are you thinking of selling a couple to capitalize on the spike week, or not yet?
I am always willing to deal anyone at any time. That's what I will
Sure.
tell
Yeah.
anybody that I'm in a league with. So, yeah, anytime somebody comes off a big league like that, am I going to try to take advantage of some people who play a little more emotionally? Sure. I mean, if they want to pay a top 5 dynasty wide receiver price for Waddle right now, yeah, absolutely, I'll deal him. I think I'd probably have him more in that 8 to 12 range right now personally, which is probably higher than most. But if somebody wants to overpay, I will 100% entertain that. Absolutely.
All
And
right.
yeah,
So
I mean, I'm known for being in chats every time there's a big game, and I'm like, Tua's on the block as soon as the game is over.
well, I'm going to call you a poser in the Waddle truther community because
Okay,
I have him at 5, right?
I like it.
And I had him at maybe 6, like for a while in the off season. So it's not like I just like shot him up a bunch of. I'm all in, love him,
Where do you have
absolutely.
Tyreek?
12.
Top. Okay.
Yeah, I am. I try to correct for my ageism in the ranks, because I've been rightfully accused of being a little too ageist the way that I look at things. So if you're somebody who's like, I value immediate production
Yep.
in my rankings, like I know, for example, Matt Hicks has like Keenan Allen in the top 10 or 12 at least,
Oh wow.
before the season. Because his thing is like, I know rookies so well. I'm gonna value this production and I'm gonna hit on my rookie picks because I
Sure.
know my shit, right? So um, that is not the way that I move things. So I try to calibrate for that. But Tyreek's what, 28 already, going on
Yes.
29 soon. Tua is not Mahomes as much as you and I believe in him. Jalen
How dare
Waddle
you say
is
that? How dare
is
you?
is a thing, right? So yeah, 12. But willing to, because I have Adams at 11, and I'm willing to flip those, like depending on my mood in the morning. Like I don't see any sort of like big difference there. They're in the same tier for me, for sure. All right, my next surprise of the small sample size that we have so far is uh, Jalen Hurts and Amon-Ra St. Brown. So, and how well they're doing, right? So, if you're a fan of the Dynasty Fever podcast, and let's face it, who isn't, right? We did a real deep dive on these two in our most recent episode. Go check it out. And the reason that we did, or the reason that I did, I was really into like pushing the numbers on this one, is because I wanted a full picture of the story. Me and Jesse were both down on him, on both of these guys relative to the community going into the season, and so my case is that I was wrong, but I'm not as wrong as people think, right? And so I did a deep dive into like the numbers, and kind of said like my conclusion is for Jalen Hurts, like, let's see him throw more deep balls when he has to. Let's see more, dropbacks under pressure and that sort of thing, and see where things go there. I don't think that, while he's a very good rusher, I don't know that those rushing attempts are gonna. I think he has like 28 in 2 games, I think,
Yeah.
for 147 yards. Like, I don't know that that's going to hold up, even though he is an elite rusher. So, just kind of wait and see. But anyway, my big surprise is just how well these guys are doing. They're both in the top 5 in their position as far as fantasy points overall and points per game just over the 2 weeks, right? Amon-Ra St. Brown has garnered an elite target share. I think it's 33.8 this season. And that speaks volumes to them being willing to scheme him open. I dug through the numbers a little bit, and I found dings for me to say wait and see, right? I only have him up at 25 now and Hurts at 11. I'm not, putting Amon-Ra in the top 12 yet, and I'm not putting Hurts in the top 5 like some people are flirting with. But for me, I am surprised at just how well they're doing. Even adjusting for me being lower than the community on these two, out of the gate, they're doing a lot better than I thought they would. And so that's one of my big surprises. Going into the season for me being lower than consensus on Amon-Ra, he was a sell for me, and I actually have 0 shares now. Right? So, so that isn't gonna work out well. I have a couple of Hurts. They were my in case I'm wrong shares. And so I think the effect though for me is also I want to think about the ripple, right? Like, what does it mean for the quarterback rankings landscape, right? My fear of Justin Fields being ruined by bad coaching is back, right? So he slides a few spots. You now are a year without Lance, and it'll be 3 years since he played any significant football when he comes back. And that significant football was in the FCS, 20 total starts under his belt as a quarterback in college and the NFL. So I slide him down a few spots, right? I was lower on Russ than some other people were already, but that coaching looks horrible, right? And so Hurts, is a riser for me. And then I also I have Lawrence now at 8. I think he was 9 or 10, in the offseason for me. So, that shift is I think happening. And I think for me, there's a big meh block of quarterbacks Mac Jones, Zach Wilson, Cousins, 98-year-old Rodgers, Davis Mills, Jameis Winston, Pickett, in that range that is ugh, which, kind of makes me feel like I want, if I'm in a super flex, I want to have 2 of those top 14 to 16 guys to feel really, really good about my roster. And that's kind of how that affects things. As far as his teammates, obviously AJ Brown is panning out. We're still waiting, I think, on Goddard to be, as huge as we think he can be. And Devonta Smith, we'll see, since AJ Brown's been having such a big target share. But, I think, those two, Hurts and AJ Brown, obviously arrow up for both. I was worried about AJ Brown getting a quarterback, I thought a passer downgrade with Hurts, but I think I'm okay now. And Amon-Ra, helps Goff's value for sure. I was already a few spots higher than the community on him, so I didn't really jack him up too much. But he's a much more viable option than people think he is, attached to Amon-Ra and the yak and Swift's production and that sort of thing. Yeah, so surprised about Hurts and Amon-Ra.
Yeah, I'm a big Amon-Ra supporter. The 2 guys that I have the most shares of across all my leagues are Amon-Ra and actually Garrett Wilson. Garrett Wilson was dropping like hotcakes in every Dynasty league I was in, so I routinely found myself trading in a spot to acquire him because I can't tell you the probably 3 or 4 times that he fell to 6, and I'm like, I don't know what's going on here, but I'm gonna go grab him immediately. And he was personally the number 1 receiver on my board. I like his talent quite a bit. So let me ask you something about Amon-Ra. Does a guy like that, and I don't know if Goff is the future of the Lions in terms of, I mean, even beyond this year, honestly. They have an out in his contract this year. So you could be looking at a situation where there's a QB change. Do you look at something like that when you're analyzing and putting a guy in your rankings? I know people are like, I can't predict that. I'm not going to even look at it. Do you look at a situation saying, I don't know what their quarterback situation is, so I'm going to move
Yeah.
him down? Or some people who don't believe in Goff say it's only going to get better from here, right, after this season. So, how much of a factor does that play
Yeah.
in for you?
So the uncertainty for me was part QB uncertainty was definitely part of me being a little down on the Sun God. Um, but I also think that the Lions aren't going to be bad enough, truly
Mhm.
to get in on Stroud or Bryce Young, right? So like, am I really that afraid of Goff not being there next year? Probably not as much as some other people. Maybe I'm wrong.
Yeah, and I mean, you are right though. Goff gets a lot of unnecessary hate. I mean, being a Rams fan in that community too, he gets a lot of unnecessary hate. I mean, we did go to the Super Bowl. But he is not as bad as people make him out to be. He is at least a league average quarterback, and I hear it thrown all around all the time. He shouldn't be a starter in this league, and there's people are crazy, but so yeah, I agree with that, and I'll tell you with Amon Ra, a lot of it is just the intangibles of his game for me. If we're being honest about it, I get very sold on the character and intangible things that we're not going to measure looking through the stat sheet. I mean, he's an elite blocker. I know that doesn't matter, but I get very into elite run blockers when it comes to running backs and receivers because it puts those guys onto the field. It puts them in positions to get more playing time, which long term leads to more production. But this is a guy who talks so much about having a chip on his shoulder and wanting to be one of the elite receivers in this league. And I know a lot of guys say that, but uh, there's
Hard
different
knocks.
levels. Yeah,
Hard
there's
knocks
just
bump.
yeah, no, for me it came before that. If you
Yeah,
watched
yeah.
anything with him last season, but yeah, that is true. That came into play for me big time because I do believe that he's a guy who's going to see steady improvement throughout the course of his career. I had him 21 in my ranks preseason just to really show the love that I had, but I'm very high on him. I can understand why people were hesitant, especially when you have them trade up so much to get a guy like Jameson. You're going to be a little hesitant to go all in on him, but I think it's going to be an interesting dynamic. Jalen Hurts is another guy, if you want to talk about intangibles, everybody loved what he did at Alabama being a team player. But for me, I more wanted to see if he could evolve as a passer. I'm
Yeah.
in the category of I still have to see it more. I need consistency. Don't get me
Yes.
wrong.
Yeah.
Am I thinking about raising him up my rankings? Yeah, absolutely. I'm thinking about it, but I'm not quite there yet where I'm going to pull the trigger to say, you know what, this guy is a top. Gosh, I think I saw him as high as third with
Yeah,
somebody
no, I
else I was
can't do
talking
that.
to.
No. I
That's
went from like
crazy.
5 I went from like 15 to like 11, and like I said, some of that is also like Fields and Lance slotting a bit.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's I'm not it, got to see it, right? It's only a cheat code if you can pass first. And if you can't pass, the NFL won't start you. And right now, I think his biggest improvement is sticking with the reads and the progressions, right? And people who watch football much more closely than I do tell me that. And he's not being aggressive and throwing into tight windows. You know, um, he's not throwing deep. He doesn't have many red zone attempts. He's been in a clean pocket because they have a good offensive line. Like let's wait and see. But speaking of Hurts, we have a question here from Julia. Where do you guys have the 4 running quarterbacks ranked in Dynasty at the moment? Tua, Lamar, Murray, and Hurts. I don't know that I'd put Tua in that crowd as a
Yep.
runner. I think he's mobile, and I think he's more recovered from his hip injury,
Mhm.
a year later. But I wouldn't put him in that crowd. But for me, I have Lamar 4, Murray 6, and Hurts at 11. Um, so I don't know if you have yours pulled up and handy, but just curious where you're at with those.
Yeah, I have Murray, Lamar, Tua, Hurts in that order right now. Yeah, I mean, you said it with Tua. When you're talking about he is mobile, you can tell he's more recovered from that hip injury. The difference between those four guys and their running abilities too is there's not many plays specifically drawn up for Tua to run the ball. And those other three guys, that's a major part of their offensive
Yeah.
philosophy and scheme, which is going to give them a little more upside. Where Tua is more of a move around in the pocket. I think more so it's going to come in him avoiding sacks more than fantasy points, if anything else. So yeah, but that's the order that I have them in.
All right. So are you next? Because I just did Hurts and Amon-Ra.
You did, yeah.
Oh,
So
okay.
yeah, I was like, I had to think in my head too. I'm like, yeah, okay, yep. Um, so Kyle Pitts is my next one. I feel like I was going to be doing myself a disservice if I didn't bring up Kyle Pitts because he's been one of the most talked about players across the fantasy community over the first 2 weeks of the season. I haven't been in a dynasty league yet where I've seen a complete sell on Kyle Pitts, which I really want to see what his value is at to people right now. So I really would love to see if anybody's seen a nice Kyle Pitts deal out there. I'd love to see that in the comments because me personally, I haven't seen anything where I'm like, okay, what are you doing here? But his struggles have been well documented. I liked Drake London coming out. I thought that was only going to benefit Kyle Pitts and making him. And of course, defenses are still keying in on Kyle Pitts because he is the number one weapon for that offense. But I was expecting, especially with London's early production, for some of that pressure to be taken off, leading to more opportunities. It's not a matter. A lot of people are pointing to Arthur Smith's game calling right now, which I'm going to say that's actually not 100% of the issue right now, which I'm probably in the minority, but I found a stat where they actually scripted 13 plays last week where Kyle Pitts was the number one receiver. And Marcus Mariota was just not able to get him the ball, which, a lot of people were worried about that in the offseason. I said in the offseason, I'd rather have Marcus Mariota right now than Matt Ryan as my quarterback, which in terms of real life production, but I think you could still debate that a little bit. But, so I think that in terms of what the issue is, I don't know still. I think everybody is on different sides of the equation. And I think it's something that I really dug into some numbers, tried to find out what was happening in terms of, his cushion, target separation. A lot of those numbers were pretty similar to last year. It's just that thus far, Marcus Mariota and him haven't had a great connection. The one stat that I did find interesting is that he's been on the line of scrimmage blocking a little more this season, which is not something that I thought that I would ever say about Kyle Pitts, because I think a month ago I was saying they just need to change his position eligibility to wide receiver at this point. But he has been playing more of a tight end role. He hasn't run as many routes this season, which I think is maybe the bigger issue here. But it's definitely something I'm surprised at. I thought he was going to be a focal point of that offense. I have quite a few shares of him because we talked about that positional advantage. I was excited to invest in Kyle Pitts last year. I thought for, the next 5+ years, he could have been that advantage for me. And he hasn't been it yet. I'm not jumping off the train quite yet, but I'm interested to see how this plays itself out because there's so many theories being thrown out there and we could talk about it all day, but I'm very curious to see what happens over the next few weeks. And I'm not ready. He's a young guy. Am I ready to bring him down in terms of where I have him in dynasty ranks? Definitely not. But, I am a little nervous about the future of that quarterback position. And the Falcons should be in a position to upgrade this offseason, which only strengthens where I have him in my rankings. But I'm definitely keeping an eye out on it.
Yeah, it's been interesting, right? We were optimistic in some ways. It's like gotta be better than last year, even though he had a real good season for a 20-year-old, right? And then and like you said, like I saw the gap between his snap percentage and like his route percentage,
Yep.
And, I was like, okay, and yeah, it turns out that he's been in line a little more than we thought. So I think the answer for me is a little like kind of like an all the above, right? Like I think Arthur Smith is not 100%, right? Like you said. But he got this job off of his, offensive acumen in Tennessee. And Didn't really do much with tight ends there. I mean, when you have Derrick Henry and AJ Brown, do you have to? But I think some of it too is, I think defenses are still keying in on him. And now that there's 2 weeks of tape on Drake London, maybe that changes a bit. Maybe they're paying more attention to London than they were, and that opens things up a bit for Pitts. But also, like you said, quarterback play isn't optimal. So that's a piece of it too. So I think it's all the above. But certainly the talent, certainly playing from behind a lot. So yeah, I think it's going to turn out better than it has so far. Yeah. It kind of has to.
There's no other option at this point.
Yeah. So my next one is going to be the level of suck for the Bears offense. And maybe I'm, the only one surprised by this. I didn't think it was going to be a good offense going in, right? But, it's pretty bad, and what we have too is, I was willing to kind of maybe give them like, all right, well, they had that weather game. Let's see what happens. And then they turn around and throw the ball even less, so it's tough. It's tough to watch, right? 28 pass attempts in 2 games. Like when going into this season, I said to folks, like, with that prior regime, for me, it was a non-zero chance that they would just ruin Justin Fields.
Oh gosh,
Right? And I said, okay, that regime's gone, right? Defensive-minded head coach moves in, but at least that regime's gone. My fear of coaching ruining Justin Fields is back, right? I think long-term, I'm still probably bullish on him relative to a lot of people. I also like Mooney and Kmet long-term, probably more than some other people do. But I didn't think it was going to be this bad, right? And so Monty, though, is interesting, right? Because he's a guy who I think a few people were ready to trash, right? And, he has that like 1.6 yards per carry game in week 1, then turns around and eats for 122 yards in the second game. So, yeah, I think, the dynasty ranking or value of guys like Fields and Mooney and Kmet are shakier than they were. And certainly, I think people have dinged them over these 2 weeks. But Monty, I'm really interested in. Like, people were ready to say he's over. Herbert's going to take over before the end of the season. I don't know. What do you think?
Yeah, I mean, I'm glad that you brought up the Bears because I was Justin Fields' #1 fan coming out of college. I said this is going to be one of the elite guys in the NFL, all of the above. And I think I was a part of that crowd where when they changed coaching regimes, you're like, okay, it can't be any worse, right? I mean, that is the surprising thing here is I don't think there's one person who said when that coaching regime was gone, it's probably going to be worse next year, right? Nobody was saying that. Everybody assumed it can't be any worse, and I can't believe that it can be worse if we're being honest about it. So I've seen, I can't think of any of the specific deals off the top of my head, but I have seen Mooney move in a few of my dynasty leagues. I'm personally holding him because I just think his value is so down. I will never, ever sell a guy low. Never, ever. I would rather he retire and I get nothing from him than selling him low. That's always been my stance on it. And I just don't think it's a smart way to negotiate or make deals. So I'm not giving up on Mooney yet. I mean, the thing that kills me is at the end of last season, you started to see them open up the offense for Justin Fields a little bit, where they were letting him push the ball down the field. You're like,
he had
okay,
a really good game against the Steelers.
He did, and you're like, okay, cool. Like I know this coaching regime's not going to be here, but as a Justin Fields truther, you were like, does he have the ability to do it in the NFL? And then towards the last few games, you saw those flashes and you're like, okay, I feel a little better. I know he can do it. It's just he's been hampered by that coaching staff. So I don't know what to make of it at this point, honestly. I think
Mhm.
everybody's a hold across the board. I've personally always been a guy that likes David Montgomery. He's a perfect example of a running back who is not sexy. I think when people are looking at running backs, they want that sex appeal, but David Montgomery is just productive in every role.
Mhm.
He does the little things right. He stays on the field. The coaching staff seems to trust him. I've always had him as a back end mid range RB2. I saw him fall out of the top 25 in a lot of people's rankings this offseason, which was, I grabbed him a few times myself with
Yeah.
his dipping value. But yeah, I think it's just. It's a wait and see game right now. It's hard to even analyze it because I love the stat that Cooper Kupp has more targets than Justin Fields has pass attempts so far this year. Kupp has 29 targets through two. That's
Yeah.
incredible. That's
Yeah.
amazing. So,
That's funny.
you would think they would have to adjust at some point. I'm not giving up on it, but yeah, it is shocking.
So in a vacuum, because I don't know or don't remember the different team situations, and I don't know where we expect the pick to be, but I saw Fields in a 23 second for Lance. What is your reaction to that?
I think a piece of that is going to determine the teams involved in that deal, whether what their goal is. Are they trying to compete? Are they punting? I mean, long term, if I'm rebuilding right now, I'd rather take the chance on Lance because we know Kyle Shanahan's going to be there. I do trust him as an offensive mind. So I think in that, I would probably prefer Trey Lance, which, have too much hesitation with the future of Justin Fields' offensive scheme. So
Mm,
I'd rather just sit out and have no production this year with the chance at gains later down the road with Lance at this point.
mm. So Julia highlighting for us that at least the defense is
Sure.
quality in the first two games, right? So that actually could be bad for fantasy,
Yeah.
right? Like that's going to be bad for the offensive crew, but yeah, no, it's a defensive minded head coach, and I don't think that's too much of a surprise. What's your next surprise?
My next one is the Vikings offense. So, something that I look at quite a bit when I'm analyzing just an individual player and the future of their what their value is going to be is I do look at coaching schemes and coaching changes. And I know it's only been 2 games for Kevin O'Connell, but that offense has looked a little different than what I thought it was going to coming from the Sean McVay coaching tree. They actually do tend to be pretty balanced for the most part. So I was expecting this offense to be fairly balanced, and thus far it hasn't been. They've been 28th in rush attempts. Throughout Dalvin Cook's career, the Vikings have really been in the top 12 or so in rushing attempts every season. So I'm curious if this is going to be more of a matter of game script. Is this going to be the norm for this Vikings offense? And
Hmm.
if it is, I think it's time for us to really start bumping Dalvin Cook down a little bit. He's crossing that 27-year-old mark as a running back, which you start to get tense when you think of that as a fantasy owner with running back. So he's hitting that age. We don't know. And, coaching scheme is really relevant when you're analyzing Dynasty. As a new head coach, they're not going to fire Kevin O'Connell after year one. I don't see him being that much of a disaster. So, you're looking at him playing in this system for, 2 or 3 years realistically. And do I have confidence that this is going to be a system that benefits their running backs? Maybe, maybe. At the beginning of the season, I would have said absolutely. This is a system Dalvin Cook's going to slide in perfectly. But so I think the way that offense has been structured thus far, very surprising to me. And if this is a trend that continues, Dalvin Cook's not done. But if his usage continues to go down, you're going to have to account for that accordingly.
Yeah, we heard coming into the season that it was going to be a more pass happy
Mm.
offense, and I know, and not that Dalvin Cook is like Justin Jefferson or anything, but
Yeah.
I said, well, yeah, Dalvin Cook catches passes. It's PPR, so I don't know how much of a ding it's going to be, but yeah, and as somebody who like I said, calibrated for my ageism and kind of floated Cook up a little bit. At this point, I'm looking at the guys I have him ranked around, and I'm like, well, who am I putting ahead? Are you ready to put Brees Hall ahead of him? I'm not personally.
Oh, I
Like,
love Brees, so yeah, I
yeah,
had him
yeah.
ahead of him.
Okay. I mean, most people do, right? Chubb,
Yeah, that's a toss-up one for me. I think I'd slightly favor Chubb right now.
Kamara,
Hmm. Yeah, I think I'd have to put Kamara above him. Yeah.
Dobbins.
Mm. See, that's where the immediate production side of me comes into play. I think
Right.
I'd
Yeah.
still have. I think I'll
Yeah.
have Cook above him. Yeah.
Yeah. Those are just the four guys
Yeah.
I have like right below him right now, just off the top of my head. So, like, like, yes, there's an argument, like you said, for those guys, but at the same time, like, I don't know that it's like convincing just yet
Hmm.
after 2 weeks. But we'll see. Bears watching for sure. Interesting game this week with Detroit, right? You think that they, on the one hand, are gonna go all out and be able to score on that defense, but positive game script, we could see a little more Cook, right? So yeah,
Absolutely.
yeah, we'll see. My next surprise is another level of suck uh, situation, and that's the level of suck for the Steelers offense, right? Again, going into this, there were questions about the O-line, and nobody thought Mitch Trubisky was elite. I didn't think it was going to be this bad. It's a mess, right? Like I said about, Najee above, he's slid down a couple spots for me. He's always been volume dependent. But now, the foot, the bad O-line, um, and just, the offense not moving the ball well. He has not, put up good numbers the first couple weeks. It's a meh quarterback, to be kind, probably, to Trubisky, and there's no plans for the coach to change it, as he's told us very, very clearly. Um, but even then, is putting in Pickett going to magically fix things in this offense? I mean, I think it would be better, but like it's not going to transform it. Um, Deontay, I feel safe about. Good PPR floor. I've always been a fan of him. And if you look at his numbers across the games, he's getting targeted, he's getting his catches. But he's also probably slipped a couple spots for me. I think Fryermuth, going into the season, I was like, he's been a little TD dependent, like a lot of tight ends are. We'll see how this shakes out. First week he was targeted a lot. Second week was 4 target, and I think he's probably going to be up and down this season, and Bears watching, and he might need TDs to produce. Pickens is chirping about being frustrated about his usage, and I'm open 99% of the time,
Uh,
right? Like, and Tomlin doesn't like that kind of shit. So,
mm-mm.
like, the offense is a mess. And I think, Jeff Bell asked an interesting question on Twitter recently. And, what does not putting in Pickett say about Pickett? You know? And, also he's 24 already and,
Mhm.
had like one good year in college, right? So maybe he's not, you know, the first round
Yeah.
20th overall pick quarterback that I was ready to say, okay, he's never going to be elite. The ceiling isn't great, but he's NFL ready, right?
Yep.
So this affects a lot of pieces, right? Your Pickens piece, your Claypool shares. You got to watch Muth, although the position is such a wasteland. What are you going to do, right? Like, I might try to, I don't have much Najee, but I'd probably try to move him to a contender. I don't know that the value's dipped that much. So, what say you about Pittsburgh?
Yeah, no, I love what you said about Kenny Pickett in terms of what does that say about him? Because the fact that Mike Tomlin doesn't care about draft capital, I mean, the guy is there to win, and the fact that he believes that Mitch Trubisky gives them a better chance to win football games is alarming and concerning to me. We're not there watching practice, watching Pickett in the building every day. So the fact that Mike Tomlin, as the head coach and leader of that franchise, that is his initial assessment of Kenny Pickett is very concerning to me personally. So I think that's a very valid point to bring up. I love Najee's talent. I haven't been as high on him as others. mostly until I see that offensive line get fixed. I grew up playing offensive line in high school, so I'm a big offensive line guy. And when you look at his numbers last year, they were 100% dependent on his volume. In terms of what he was doing with that volume, it was not ideal. I believe I had it written down. So, yeah, he was 48th in points per opportunity in fantasy, which is uh, that is horrendous, and he led the league, or he was second in the league in runs stuffed at the line of scrimmage. So,
Mm-hmm.
as a running back, if that offensive line isn't situated, I don't care how talented you are, it's going to be tough climbing. And we've seen that usage dip a little bit. It was unsustainable based on last year. He had 86.5%, I believe, opportunity share last year, which is astronomical. That's what we've seen from Derrick Henry for the last 3 or 4 years. And really not sustainable for in terms of having a long career, which would be my biggest concern if that was the trend that continued. So until that offensive line is fixed, and once again, let's talk about coaching scheme. Matt Canada's play calling has been absolutely horrendous thus far. I don't think that it's been a very creative scheme. And when you look at the pieces that they have, a lot of talent, and when you have a poor offensive line, it's the job of the play caller to be a little creative in your play calling, because you have to make up for those deficiencies of the offensive line. So, that get guys in motion, get Pickens in space. They have talent and size, but until that offensive scheme fixes itself, and until I see that offensive line improved, which they really didn't make any moves this offseason to improve that offensive line, which was mind-boggling to me, because that was clearly their number one need heading into the offseason. Of course, kind of figuring out what was going to happen at the quarterback position as well. But until the offensive scheme and line are fixed, I'm not really willing to invest in this offense much in
Mm-hmm.
Dynasty, because
Yeah.
you're looking over the next 1 to 3 years, a scheme change, which can bring a lot of positives and negatives with it. So I'm very hesitant on this offense as well. I was already skeptical because of the line, but I'm even more so after 2 weeks of the season. Not that I'm going crazy, but I think it's definitely concerning.
Okay. And your final surprise is.
My final surprise is good old Derrick Henry, who it's funny. I don't think anyone ever wanted to consider the fact that Derrick Henry could be on the decline of his career. I personally sold out of him. You were on that boat too? Yeah, I sold out of all of my shares of Derrick Henry this offseason while I could. There was, I think, a decent size of the community that still believed in Derrick Henry, saying, he can't possibly, come off the mountain that he's been on for so long. But, it's not beyond the or the carries and the touches he's had over the last few years. This is another offensive line that has been really bad thus far this year. They've ranked 21st so far in run block rating. You have questions at QB. I'm not a big Malik Willis guy. Even if he comes in, do I think he's going to be the savior of the Titans? I absolutely do not believe that. You have Derrick Henry's opportunity share dipping about 10% to what we're used to. That's going to be something that continues to decline. So when you look at all of those, I think it's time. Derrick Henry, I was seeing kind of ranked in that 14 range, 14, 15 range for a lot of people. I think it's time we consider him more of a mid to back range RB2 and really start sliding him down those rankings. I think there's a lot of things going against him right now. And I think the first 2 weeks of the season kind of confirmed a lot of my suspicions about him. And I know for a lot of people that have been on the Derrick Henry train for the last 3, 4 years, it's kind of surprising to them.
I was pretty much out. Yeah, like I have him at like 16 or 17 now.
Yep.
I it's again one of those things where like I look a couple notches below and I'm like Elijah Mitchell,
Yeah.
right? Like
Yeah, who am I gonna
yeah,
put above him?
Etienne, right? Monty, CEH, right? The one that I technically have below him that I'm willing to leapfrog is AJ Dillon.
Mhm.
But even then, right, the world came into the season thinking like, oh, it's a sure bet that they're going to use that out in Aaron Jones' contract, and he's 28 or whatever, and they're going to get him out of town, right? I don't know, right?
Yeah.
Like that offense might need him, like Because the pass catchers are not great. So, you know, I don't know. So I'm going to ask you a question about a
Sure.
trade that I made involving Derrick Henry.
Great.
So this is, the usual, 12 team PPR Superflex tight end premium. It's one of those onesie leagues, one running back league.
Sure. Yep.
And I took over an orphan. For some reason, I still don't like that word orphan, just
I
because
don't either.
it's just like, because orphans are a real thing, like, and
Yeah.
it's tragic. So I took over a team, and it's one of those things where, like, okay, I'm going to strip it down and rebuild this thing because it's got pieces that need to move, right? And Derrick Henry was one of them. So I traded. Oh shoot, where is
And
it?
this was in the off season then.
No, I took it over right on the eve of the season, and so this was like
Gotcha.
maybe after week 1.
Okay.
Let me see. So I moved Derrick Henry and Dontrell Hilliard.
Whatever.
Gabe Davis 23 second, 23 fourth, and 24 third.
Yeah. No, I'd be all for that. I mean, I'm a big Gabe Davis guy. I've been all in on him. So yeah, you get the upside there plus the longevity. So yeah, I like that.
Yeah, no, I like it too. Especially considering the market moving on Henry, and it's not. I don't know that it's going to move up significantly, even if he does sort of, get used better than he is the first 2 weeks. So, yeah. All right. So my final surprise of the season is I want to end on a positive note. It's a feel-good story for me with Curtis Samuel. So in 2021, I was assigned to write a Dynasty write-up on him, and it was positive. It was essentially, are the Washington coaches gonna use him the way he was used in his last year in Carolina, because that kind of shifted things for him, and he was used better, and so that was the question, right? And then just been injuries and slow recovery and another injury and that sort of thing. But now he's getting used kind of like we expected him, to get used as, a volume receiver, not a huge deep threat or anything like that. So you're not gonna, do that, and no huge ceiling. But for example, his ECR this week is, wide receiver 27, right? Going into a game where they're going to have to throw a lot, and he's going to be targeted. He's got a 23.5% target share, right? He's got 2 TDs. He's not going to have a TD all 17 games, but that's good to see that they are, getting him the ball and he's getting in the end zone. He still just turned 26 in August on a team with a competent enough quarterback for now. Certainly better quarterback than they've had, and a bad defense, so they're going to have to play from behind. My one thing with Samuel, I just think it's a cool story. It's a good story. It makes me feel good. The one thing, though, is like, is Wentz going to be there long? And Sam Howell behind him, he's all right, but he ain't the answer either. So, I wonder about the quarterback with Samuel, but I just think it's a really cool story. And, I had him buried in like the 70s as like, I don't know what the hell to do with him. And I think I got him up now in like the 40s or 50s, because it's like, okay, I can see that this is going to work out at least for 2022. Yeah.
Yeah, no, and it's cool when you see a guy come out from the depths like that. I was also in the boat, kind of writing him off. And do I think that he has upside to be an elite fantasy asset? No. Could he be, a Jarvis Landry, Randall Cobb kind of player that can play in the slot, be effective, be a nice flex wide receiver 3 for you in the right matchup? Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's a lot more than we could say, a month ago. So I've been pleasantly surprised by that as well. I'm interested to see how those targets are distributed long term. Dotson's
Mm-hmm.
been, great in the red zone. I've always been a huge Terry McLaurin fan personally.
Mm-hmm.
we'll see what that looks like long term. But for right now, he has at least made himself a viable asset.
Yeah, I definitely like McLaurin. I think for now, I think Dotson. I like Dotson. He was high in my rankings going into the draft. Um, I think for now he's probably going to be like maybe a little boom busty.
Yeah.
Yeah, and Samuel is gonna be that reliable floor. But as you said, as it develops over the season, we'll see. Yeah, yeah. All right. That just about does it for us and our surprises. So, time to land the plane. If you're listening to the audio only version on the Going for Two live podcast feed, please make sure that you subscribe, rate, and review, and tell the Going for Two live podcast feed how awesome Dynasty Saturday Night 5 is. Time for plugs. Jordan, where can they find you on the Twitters? Where can they find your work? Where can they find you probably wearing a different t-shirt in a few minutes?
Yeah, so I host the Cover Zero podcast where we cover IDP rankings and IDP sleepers each week, Jerry and I, through the Going for Two network. So you can find that Twitter at Cover Zero, zero spelled out GF2. You can find my personal Twitter at Dr. DR Fantasy Sports. I write a weekly article for Going for Two where I list out 10 bold fantasy predictions, and I actually track my results throughout the year, which makes it really interesting and really fun. So you can catch that on Going for Two as well. But yeah, the Cover Zero podcast will be on a little less than an hour from now, so make sure you check that out.
All right. Thanks. Yeah, 9 o'clock. Yeah. So 9 o'clock Eastern, right?
Yes, sir. Yeah,
So,
9 o'clock.
yeah.
So yeah, actually, yeah, less than half an hour now.
All right. Friend of the show, Julia, showing us some love. Keep those intelligent conversations coming, and blessings to both of us. Thank you, Julia. Always appreciate you watching and interacting in the chat. You can find me on Twitter at @FFJunkie_. I'm also the host of Dynasty Fever podcast, which will be dropping on Thursday mornings now. Moving forward, we have a steady day. It's audio only. You can follow that show at Dynasty Fever Pod. You can find my Dynasty rankings on goingfor2.com. A few articles. Please, maybe ignore the Komet one for now. But my magnum opus, my finally got around to writing my 10 commandments of Dynasty trading is up live on the site. And just, I just kind of having some fun with my pet peeves and things that I advise people not to do, and a little bit get off my lawn there in one of the commandments, but that's what I do. Going for Two family has lots of content. We've got podcasts every night of the week. Or every day of the week, Sunday morning pregame. We got the website with all sorts of articles. Follow Going for Two with the number 2 on Twitter, Going for Two Live with the number 2 on Twitter. And when you go on the website, on the bottom right, there'll be a little purple Discord thing. Hop on in, join the free Discord. There's so many channels and so much good conversation going on, and you'll see Jordan and I there as well. And just another plug for IDP Cover Zero coming up in a few minutes on this same YouTube channel. Mm-hmm. So take a break, go get a beverage, maybe use the restroom, stretch a little bit, and come back and get your IDP fix. Jordan, thank you so much for graciously giving me your time. Josh is at a wedding this weekend, and so you were nice enough to fill in. I really appreciate it.
Absolutely.
All right, folks, that's a wrap. Thanks for being with us.